Ash Wednesday tradition. Pope Francis celebrates Mass and leads a solemn procession in Rome. Prayerful remembrance. As the Pope prays for Egyptian Christians killed in Libya, Coptic Christians in the U.S. react. Substance or show? The White House Summit on Extremism draws criticism from some experts. And Lake Placid flashback, revisiting the miracle on ice 35 years later. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Ash Wednesday, February 18th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Pope Francis holds to an Ash Wednesday tradition in Rome, marking the beginning of Lent. The Holy Father led a solemn procession on Rome's ancient Aventine Hill. He later celebrated Mass at St. Sabina's Basilica and distributed ashes there. That basilica dates to the early 5th century. The Pope said Lent is a time of conversion when we should return to God. Earlier in the day, the Pope prayed for the Egyptian Christians killed in Libya because of their faith.
Il Signore li accolga nella sua casa.
The Pope prayed that God welcome those victims into his house. He also made another appeal for peace in the Middle East and in North Africa. And across the world, Christians are responding to those calls for prayer. Today, members of the Coptic Orthodox community in the Middle East and here in Washington joined in services of remembrance. Wyatt Goolsby has the story.
From a monastery in Jerusalem to churches in Jordan, Coptic Christians have joined in mourning for the 21 Egyptians allegedly beheaded by ISIS in Libya. As clergy chant and use incense in the Middle East, Coptic Christians here in the U.S. are joining in the same prayers. At St. George's Coptic Orthodox Church in Maryland, pictures of the victims are on display.
The Copts live on prayers. So events like these would definitely strengthen our life of prayers and also our bonding together.
Father John Farag says unity in the church is vital for Coptic Christians who see themselves as one family. With origins in Egypt, the Coptic Orthodox Church is the largest Christian denomination in the Middle East, tracing their leadership all the way back to St. Mark. They even have their own pope, who Pope Francis has called his brother. The Holy Father has even joined with Copts this week in calling the victims martyrs.
It's wonderful to see that Pope Francis had the kind remarks that he did and how he reached out to our Pope Tawadros.
It was pretty much a huge event that brought all of us together, and it's great to see all the Christians, coming together as one, and that's what we are. We're one.
And Coptic Christians say it's in that spirit that they move forward. Father John believes all the victims are in heaven, joining the martyrs who have come before.
We believe that God doesn't do anything in vain. We believe that the blood of the martyrs will not only cry for justice, but it will open the door for the work of God to prevail, for peace. That's how you get peace.
Pope Francis has also called for prayers for the entire Christian population in the Middle East, which has been dwindling for more than a century. Many people in the region fear increasing violence and persecution by ISIS could further diminish the minority groups. Brian.
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. Now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world.
We must never accept the premise that they put forward, because it is a lie. Nor should we grant these terrorists the religious legitimacy that they seek. They are not religious leaders, they're terrorists.
The president speaking late this afternoon in a White House summit on countering violent extremism. So, is it extremism or is it terrorism? Is it religious or is it secular? Susanne LaFrankie is at the White House tonight covering that summit that seems to pose more questions than answers.
Brian, the White House calls this three-day meeting a summit on countering violent extremism, not Islamic terror. It comes as the U.S. seeks to enlist other, mostly Arab or Muslim nations to join together to rid the world of militant groups that adhere to rigid interpretations of Islam.
It has to be about more than just countering violent extremism. We have to have a dialogue across a range of issues.
But critics say the first step in destroying Islamic extremists is to call it by name.
You can't sacrifice reality upon the altar of political correctness.
Terrorism expert Michael Rubin says violent Islamic extremism is exploding, and the Islamic State may control more territory than any time in Islamic history. But the Obama administration has gone to great lengths to avoid linking Muslim extremists to the Islamic State.
These are Islamic extremists. These aren't animal lovers. These aren't environmental advocates. They're talking about people who are motivated by an Islamist ideology. And therefore, we have to zero in on that.
Although the recent beheadings of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians was condemned by the White House, in a weekend statement, the victims were referred to as Egyptian citizens and innocents, not Christians. Experts argue understanding religious motivations is key to defeating Muslim extremists.
The fact that the victims were Christian and the victims were selected specifically because of their faith, we're doing ourselves a disservice and we're being disrespectful to the Christian community at large.
At today's press briefing, Josh Earnest continued with diplomatic wordplay.
This is not a religious war. This is not a war on Islam. And those individuals do not represent Islam.
Later this evening, hundreds of Coptic Christians will hold a candlelight vigil just outside the gate here on the North Lawn at the White House to mourn their brothers who were brutally murdered in Libya this weekend. Brian?
Susanne LaFrankie at the White House, thank you. The top job is no longer interim for the former special agent who's been temporarily leading the U.S. Secret Service. Joseph Clancy was originally appointed 4 months ago after the previous director was forced out. Embarrassing security breaches led to a review agency recommending a series of improvements. The agency's report said the Secret Service is, quote, starving for leadership. It recommended looking outside the agency for a new director. Well, after weeks of fighting, a key city falls to Russian-backed separatists in Ukraine today, weakening a ceasefire deal. The town captured today links two major separatist cities. Ukraine's president says the government pulled most of its troops out. He denies claims that pro-Russian rebels had the government troops encircled. The rebels say they took hundreds of soldiers captive. The German government, which helped broker this ceasefire, calls the rebels' advance, quote, a serious strain on the agreement. Denmark's prime minister joins mourners at the funeral for a security guard who was shot and killed outside a synagogue this past weekend. Members of the Jewish community and other Danes came to offer condolences to the victim's family. Security was tight around the cemetery. There's been increased protection of the Jewish community in recent days. The gunman who shot the security guard was killed in a firefight with police early Sunday morning. Authorities think the shooting spree may have been inspired by the attacks in Paris last month. Crucifixes were overturned and gravesites vandalized in 2 French towns today. Swastikas were discovered in 2 other towns. 250 Jewish graves were desecrated last weekend in eastern France. The French justice minister warns of devastating hatred which, quote, deeply harms the Republic of France. Millions of immigrants who illegally entered the U.S. as children must wait to apply for relief from deportation. The administration's expansion of deferred action for childhood arrivals was to begin today. President Obama is quick to counter a federal judge's ruling in Texas that puts that plan on hold.
I held off taking these executive actions until we had exhausted all possibilities of getting congressional action done. With a new Congress, my hope has been that they now get serious in solving the problem. Instead, what we've had is a series of votes to kick out young people who have grown up here.
26 states sued the Obama administration last year to block his plans for immigrants to avoid deportation. A trial date for the administration to appeal the injunction hasn't been set. John Hudak is a fellow in governance studies at Brookings Institution, and Andrew Kloster is a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And Andrew, on what grounds did this judge rule to block the president's immigration order?
Well, it was on the grounds that this trial is going to go forward and that there's a likelihood that these states will win their lawsuit. So in order to preserve the status quo, the judge said, we're going to put a hold on the administration's plans to go forward. But
the legal grounds, can you clarify those for us, John?
So what the judge has essentially said is that the administration is not simply refusing to enforce the law in certain areas, but they're taking an affirmative action. They're actually doing something in setting up a system to allow these immigrants to stay here. And that's the real gist of where this concern is in the judge's eyes.
And there was a requirement then for them to give a public notice and to get some kind of feedback before such an edict was issued.
That's right. If you're setting up a system like this, it's considered a regulatory action, a final agency action, where the public has to have time to respond and comment to it. That wasn't offered in this case. Of course, the administration has a different view of what this was, but that's what the judge is focusing on.
So this will delay the implementation of this, or perhaps put it off indefinitely. But you say that it is good public policy, this injunction.
So I think the injunction is right, and while immigrant advocacy groups are crying foul about it, what this does is it puts on hold the status quo, or it keeps in place the status quo, and it says we're not going to bring these undocumented individuals out of the shadows and then after a few court decisions force them back into the shadows.
Well, Andrew, the judge avoided the issue of presidential power, constitutional authority. Does that mean these are now moot points?
I don't think so. I mean, this particular case is under something called the Administrative Procedure Act. It's a statute. It's been in place since the Roosevelt administration, and it basically sets out the way that agencies are allowed to exercise their authority. But we've seen a slew of other lawsuits related to other actions the president has taken that do implicate the Take Care Clause of the Constitution. And a lot of what the judge said this week can implicate that analysis as well, that constitutional analysis.
Of course, Congress has been moving on its own. The House passed legislation. The budgeting bill, the budget for the Homeland Security, is tied to trying to undo this. Will that move forward? Does the court ruling affect that, do you think?
From what I understand, that will not actually affect what's happening on Capitol Hill. It seems that Republicans are going to continue to push forward. It also seems that Senate Democrats are going to continue to block stopgap measures or a bill that defunds this sort of program. So the ruling doesn't seem to be affecting what's happening in the House or the Senate.
John, agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree. From everything that I've been hearing, the Republicans are going to continue what they're doing. Democrats are going to continue what they're doing. What this judge in Texas has done is given members of Congress and senators a real political opening, and they're not going to take it, and that's going to come back to bite them.
So what happens to the cases of these immigrants who would have begun applying for this relief from deportation today?
They have to wait. The president was explicit that he's not going to try in any way to get around this court ruling. He's going to respect it and let the legal process play out. And so in the meantime, what these undocumented individuals are facing today and tomorrow is exactly what they were facing yesterday and the day before.
And Andrew, what do you think should happen at this point? What would you hope to happen?
Well, I would hope that in the whole host of areas where the administration is deciding to flaunt the law, that they would start accepting the rule of law. This particular case, I myself am personally rather pro-immigration, but at the same time, there are laws on the books. In this case, there seems to be no application process that is a part of the law on the books. So until Congress passes the law and the president signs it, it's an unfortunate circumstance.
And of course, the Catholic Church teaches compassion to immigrants, and yet we need to abide by laws. Andrew Kloster from Heritage, John Hudak from Brookings, we thank you both for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Coming up, Rome's centuries-old Station Church pilgrimage begins on this Ash Wednesday, and the Pope says he feels small alongside members of the Italian Coast Guard who risk their lives to save migrants. Lord, grant us the grace to know that we are sinners. That's a tweet from Pope Francis to begin Lent on this Ash Wednesday, February the 18th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of the solemn Lenten season. Jason Calvi has the story you could say is older than dirt.
Some are large, others are smudges, while some are clearly crosses.
Are your marks big?
Oh, I like them big. I like big. I like to do everything I do big. I really am praying that people are not doing this for the wrong reason. That it's not just a sign of, hey, look at me, I'm cool, I'm in the Catholic club, but rather the sign of, I really need Jesus because I'm a sinner.
People are packing into St. Peter's on Capitol Hill. Here and around the globe, Catholics recall an ancient truth.
Remember you are dust, and unto dust you shall return.
Ashes are a sign of penance and death.
that reminder compels us to live today as fully as possible, to live and to love as fully as possible, because today might be your last.
Ash Wednesday begins 40 days of prayer, almsgiving, which is giving to the poor, and fasting.
I'm giving up dessert, which is, you might not think that's a heavy lift, but it is. I'm the dessert queen.
I think I'm going to increase my prayer this Lent, see if I can grow a little closer to God.
I'll be picking up reading the Bible more.
Today and on Good Friday, Catholics must fast. The Church says Roman Catholics aged 18 to 60 can eat only one full meal and 2 small meals. Today and on every Friday in Lent, Roman Catholics above the age of 14 should abstain from meat. Father Burns says we shouldn't miss the point.
It's easy to say, you know, I finished Lent and I've lost weight and my liver is healthier and everything's fabulous, except I didn't know Jesus. Well, don't bother that.
So we begin 40 days to set our sights on the Lord. In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Jason.
Pierre. Good to see you. Bye.
Thank you, Jason. On this Ash Wednesday, another ancient Lenten tradition begins in Rome. The Station Church pilgrimage dates back to the 4th century. It began today at St. Sabina, where the Pope later celebrated Mass. Pilgrims filed in early this morning for Mass, which is celebrated every day in a different church. The pilgrimage is now led by priests from NAC, the North American College. We asked some pilgrims about their Lenten journey.
For me, a big part of it is just being committed to this pilgrimage, which includes rising very early.
I'm giving up like typical sweets, that type of thing, but I'm also trying to pray morning and night, say a rosary.
Pope Francis thanks members of the Italian Coast Guard for risking their lives to save others. The Holy Father met with rescuers last night, listening to their stories of saving migrants. One guard shared how he was greeted by hundreds of migrants on an unmanned boat. More than 170,000 migrants landed by sea in Italy last year. Most were seeking asylum. Migrants often pay smugglers to cross the Mediterranean Sea in ships that are in poor condition. As the sanctity of matrimony is challenged worldwide, a lively Catholic couple dances in faith to the teachings of the Church. Mark Irons has their story.
At their wedding, they danced down the aisle.
We call that a Thanksgiving, and that's common in the Mass in Nigeria.
Nigerians are party people. There's always something that is worth celebrating.
The honeymoon has ended, 6 months have passed, and weekday Mass isn't as festive as the wedding. But Nigerian-American couple Kingsley and Winnie Obike still have reason to celebrate.
The joy in marriage is discovery, getting to know and love and cherish each other, and just know each other for who we are.
Those are some of our talents.
Out of nowhere, we just have the inspiration.
They may not need guidance in the kitchen.
Really delicious. No cookbook.
But their marriage depends on it.
Hail Mary, full of grace, and what is it? This is a relationship that began with faith and prayer.
There were days when Kingsley and I couldn't pray in person, so we would pray on the phone. We would say the rosary, and I have all the phone bills to prove it.
Both are working students. Winnie, a PhD student in political communication, and Kingsley, a graphic designer and aspiring artist.
She is always encouraging in my art.
They say that encouragement and support is key in their marriage.
Knowing how to accommodate each other given the stresses of life, whether it's school stress, apply for jobs, trying to get internships.
In a world of no-fault divorce and questions about the meaning of marriage, I asked how they plan to stay true to the sacrament of matrimony.
We're told as Christians to be in the world but not of the world.
Praying together, going to Mass together, practicing natural family planning, following the way that the Church has outlined for us to live as married couples.
You will sacrifice something about yourself getting into a marriage, but what you get into is definitely worth it.
And they're still dancing.
In 6 months, it feels like, we're still newlyweds. I hope that in a year or 2 years, because of the foundation that we have, we will still be rooted in Christ.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, Catholics take to social media sharing selfies wearing ashes on their foreheads. And they called it a miracle. Olympic heroes returned to Lake Placid 35 years after making hockey history. Do you know where your ashes comes from? Palm fronds saved from the previous Palm Sunday are burned. Their ashes is blessed by a priest before it's marked on our foreheads. Thanks for joining us on this Ash Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and most of us have seen people on the streets or in the office with ashes on their foreheads today. I had mine on all day before pre-show makeup. You may even see some of them on your Twitter stream now. Catherine Szeltner is here tonight to show us how Ash Wednesday is being marked online.
Brian, it's a new twist for a Lenten tradition, the ash tag. Catholics and other Christians are taking selfies with their freshly applied ashes. They're posting the photos and tagging them with hashtag. Everyone from politicians to local parishioners are getting involved. The U.S. bishops are encouraging people to get in on the hashtag trend. They say tens of thousands of people already have.
So it creates these really personal reactions within people that I think can be a great tool of evangelization without even opening our mouths.
But not everyone agrees. Some critics say the emphasis is on retweets and not repentance. Catholic blogger Elizabeth Scalia has concerns.
It trivializes something that's so important, so meaningful. And when you take something that's very important and you allow it to become something trendy, when you toss it into the zeitgeist like that, there's always the risk of it becoming untrendy.
So what do you think? Is the hashtag a good way to evangelize or too much focus on ourselves? You can tweet us at EWTN News Nightly and let us know your thoughts. Brian?
I think your ashes looks great. Thank you, Catherine. Well, perhaps it wasn't a miracle as the church defines miracles, but a U.S. hockey team victory 35 years ago now will always be the miracle on ice. An arena in Lake Placid, New York keeps alive its link to an Olympic miracle.
Once again, the U.S. hockey team has provided an unexpected thrill. They weren't supposed to win a medal at these Olympic Games, but they'll go home with the gold.
This team was special for a lot of reasons. Our coach and the players really figured out how to win collectively and be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Goalie Jim Craig and his teammates became overnight heroes after defeating the mighty Soviets in the 1980 Winter Olympics. They clinched the gold by later rallying past Finland in the round robin.
This is when our team lit the cauldron in Salt Lake City in 2002.
Micah Ruzioni scored the winning goal against the Soviets, the game forever known as the Miracle on Ice.
We went to Lake Placid to hopefully win a medal, and it turned out it was a gold medal. We didn't know the country was going to react the way they did. We were just blown away by it, and I think 35 years later, we still are.
It's pandemonium here on the field.
Even to this day, you know, people talk about what happened in 1980, and there aren't many athletic events that have that kind of a story.
The experience changes as you get older and you get more mature. You understand it differently, and it becomes more special.
Members of the Miracle team head back to Lake Placid this weekend, 35 years after making history there. The mountain town still attracts elite athletes and tomorrow's Olympic hopefuls. But this weekend, Lake Placid will focus on its famous past. It's hard to believe. That's been 35 years. Well, that's our show for this Ash Wednesday. We want to thank Father Patrick of the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word for celebrating our Ash Wednesday Mass in our Lady of Guadalupe Chapel here at EWTN News Nightly. And we appreciate working for a Catholic network that gives us that wonderful opportunity. So until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. Watch again if you'd like on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for joining us on this Ash Wednesday, and we end tonight revisiting Ash Wednesday in Rome and today's general audience with Pope Francis. Good night and God bless you.